This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Connected Data, the makers of Transporter and the brand new Transporter Sync. Find out more and get 10% off the new Transporter Sync with the offer code MV10 at filetransporter.com/MV. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this is a very special treat for me to talk to both Adam and Tonya Engst at once, and about something as auspicious as a 10-year anniversary of their Take Control ebook series. Tonya, it's great to see you. Adam, welcome back.
Nice to see you, Chuck.
Yeah. So, guys, and unfortunately, we were not able to connect right on or right around the exact 10-year anniversary because Adam and Tonya both actually were jetting off to the Mac Tech conference.
Yes, although it was really funny. We get there and people are saying to Tonya, "Oh, it's so nice to see you again, from last year." And she's like, "I didn't go last year."
Yeah. And hopefully they hadn't been drinking already. Anyway. But no, I did not want to let this get by without talking to you because 10 years in this industry is a long time, and it sort of couples in with tidbits that has been out there for a longer time. You all have this history of taking projects and sticking with them, not just to stick with them, but having successful projects that you stick with. And
I guess the unsuccessful ones we drop quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, we have a history with our two most successful projects. Tidbits, what is it, 23 years?
It'll be 24 in April.
Will be 24, and the Take Control series, which we did start a decade ago. But we have had, I would say, several. Flop isn't the right word, but things we have decided not to stick with because they clearly were not going to solve the problem of paying the mortgage. I think it's safe to say we keep trying new things, which is very exciting because you get to try new things.
Well, I feel like you all were on the forefront of this. It's like once more you were kind of ahead of the curve a little bit. And I want to go back to 10 years ago when PDFs were not.
Do you have the music? We need the music.
The PDFs were not as common. Ebooks were on the horizon, maybe a little bit, sort of. We had no iPads, we had no iPhones, and you all decided to get into the ebook business.
Yes, we did.
Why? What were you seeing that the rest of us didn't?
Well, it was a combination of factors. So I'm going to talk about one factor that was affecting me, and then I think Adam will talk about a few factors. So the factor that was affecting me was I was doing freelance editing for Peachpit, and I was editing, actually had been editing for maybe 12 months, 18 months, a bunch of different books about Final Cut Pro. And I spent the summer before we rolled out the Take Control series editing a particular book. It was incredibly long. There was enormous pressure from the big booksellers, Barnes & Noble, Borders, to finish it already so they could feature it on an aisle end cap. They were, Peachpit was going to pay them money and they were willing to feature it, but it had to be done by a certain date. There was no way it was going to be done. It was very frustrating because it felt like, look, we've got, 400 pages of this book ready to go. They're double edited, completely done. It's just we've got another 400 left to write. And so I remember kind of storming around the house saying, why don't we just sell the 400-page book and, people can download PDFs of the rest of the chapters off the web when they're done, which would just be so much more civilized. And that did not happen. Well, nowadays the book would be developed definitely with a model like that in mind, no question. But that idea was just hovering in the air in August and September before the October when we launched the series. And I think Adam mixed some other things with that idea, so I'm going to pass the ball over to Adam so he can continue the story.
The thing that we'd been running into was that we had done most of the jobs in publishing. I had written a number of books, Tonya had edited books, we had worked on Tidbits for a long time. We had done magazine writing. So we'd done all the different kind of forms of publishing from the authoring and editing standpoint. And frankly, we thought it was pretty broken. Tonya's story about the Final Cut Pro book was a perfect example of one of the ways it was broken. But as authors, we were pretty unhappy with, frankly, the financial structure. That when I was writing for Peach Pit, I was getting 20% royalties for my books because I was doing what was called packaging, where I would give them a final book. They didn't have to do any layout or anything. But even still, 20%, and that was on the selling, on the wholesale price. So the price, if Amazon or a bookstore bought a book for $15, I'd get 20% of that, not 20% of the $30. So it was one of those situations where you felt like you weren't, in some ways, really making that much money from your work either. And so, just sort of thing after thing. Plus, Johnny hinted at this, but it wasn't just that Final Cut Pro was sort of too big to finish in a reasonable amount of time. It was that Apple was going to be releasing updates before the book was even done. And so you had to be cycling back. We weren't fast enough in paper. And so it was just kind of this collection of things that all came together at the same moment of, we wanted to do something different. We wanted to be able to go into more depth than we could do in Tidbits or in any magazine article could. And, honestly, we wanted to create something that would use a different business model than Tidbits, which, we had started internet advertising back in 1992. No one had done it before us. But Google has never said thank you, and we never got to be like Google. So, clearly there was a business model gap there from the Tidbits perspective. So we wanted to try a situation where people would actually be paying us directly for the content.
Well, and at that point, there started to be cart providers. So you didn't have to write your own cart and actually process all the transactions yourself, which really requires a bunch of very responsible people with appropriate legal and accounting training. You could contract out to a third-party cart provider, and you could sell something at a very low cost. It was the ability to not only contract out, but only charge a very small amount that had just really started to become something that we were aware of as something you could do over the internet. So that was another really important piece. And it was new. It was new then. We didn't have the App Store or the iBook Store, or we did have PayPal, but PayPal didn't have like a quick cart thing that just anybody could use. So this was. It's hard to think how much has changed in 10 years.
It really is. But one thing though that intrigues me about this whole thing is the way that you approach the Take Control books. I think if I'd been in your place and decided to do this, the temptation, in fact, maybe even the logical thing to do would have been, hey, let's do some really extensive books because we have no distribution cost to speak of. So instead of trying to shrink the books down and make them a little tighter, it would have been Liberty Hall, man. Just, if you want to write that 1,600-page book on Final Cut, you go for it.
Oh yeah, go nuts! But you still won't finish before Apple updates it.
Oh yeah.
So no, there was a big problem with that, and we knew what this problem was too because I had written Internet Starter Kit for Macintosh, which it's one of its editions came close to 1,000 pages, and it's just too much work, and it's too much work for a couple of reasons. One is, you're guessing. You don't know that you're going to make this money. At least in the traditional book world, you've got an advance. So you sort of know you're going to make that advance. We didn't have that kind of back.
And then the publisher is guessing. Someone is guessing.
The publisher's guessing. So, we didn't have that kind of money. So we decided we would split our royalties, or whatever we earned, with the authors. Authors doing all the writing, we'll do all the publishing. 50-50 split. But that means that, we're all taking a big risk if this book doesn't hit. So that's thing one. You don't want to put in, vast amounts of work on something you don't know is going to hit if you can avoid it. Thing two is that, even with the Internet Starter Kit, I constantly got comments from people saying, it's too long. I couldn't read it all. Couldn't you have written a shorter book? And, come on, you don't have to read it all just because it's sitting there in front of you. There's an index, there's a table of contents, you could just flip. But no, people were always perturbed about how much I had written. And also we figured, and I think this was accurate from what we've learned subsequently, that reading on the screen is still one of those things that's not quite as comfortable. You don't want to, you don't have quite that same sense of where you are physically in a book. It's easier to kind of get lost. And so something that's tighter, that's more focused, works better for an on-screen reading experience.
And like you said, we had just Macs in those days. We did not have any of the iDevices sitting there to make it a bit more like the traditional reading experience, if you can call that traditional reading.
One of the things that's kind of interesting to realize, and I actually was just looking at these dates, we don't think about this, but we've been doing Take Control since 2003, right? The iPhone doesn't ship till 2007, and the iPhone really made no difference to our business. We got a few people saying, I'd kind of like to read your books on an iPhone, but the screen's too small. It really is not a great experience, particularly for a tech book where you kind of need to be understanding. It's one thing if you're reading a romance novel or something, I guess. But even still, the iPhone is not a great reading experience. The iPad doesn't appear until 2010. So we've been doing this for 7 years.
That iPad, I would say before the iPad, there was a slight and gradual awareness among other people that there were ebooks and there were ebook readers, and we had some Kindles before the iPad.
They were lousy.
But it was a slight and gradual growing awareness. But with the iPad, it was like, I'd say we fell off a cliff, except I think we climbed up a cliff in like a week. People's expectations that there would be ebooks, they would work well on their iPads, they could download them to their iPads, just like a light switch being turned on. It was that fast. And now, looking back, it's almost hard to imagine a world where people sold ebooks and there weren't pretty decent mobile ebook readers like iPads to read them on. It's really been transformative.
Right. And in fact, the early days of the iPad, it was terrible experience. And it's still not great in some ways.
we were absolutely scrambling when the iPad first came out because people wanted to download right from the cart to the iPad, like right into iBooks. iBooks cannot take a download from a website, not directly. And Apple has made it much easier now than it used to be. But we were just scrambling to give people information. And we had actually been working on some technology to enable user accounts on our website. And all of a sudden, we had some ideas for what we would do with the user accounts, but we were just progressing pretty slowly. And all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, they can download the ebook into their iPad from the website if they have a user account. And we got those user accounts going really fast because the interest, the demand, and the expectation. People were like, what is with you people? You're Apple people and we can't download your books to the iPad? That is just wrong. And we're like, well, yeah, you're right, it's wrong, but we got to get user accounts working on a server, and there's, just the two of us. It's complicated, but we did it. We absolutely did it.
Well, and again, much as certainly we had our issues, Apple didn't have the tools in place for a long time. Original versions of iBooks didn't deal with PDFs. We were pushing people to Goodreader because of that. Even after that. Even now, you still can't download a zip file into Safari. I think you can do it in Mail now. Just in the iOS 7, they added zip support in Mail and a couple of other places, but not Safari, I guess. I haven't tested this recently. But the fact is that what works on a Mac well doesn't work on an iOS device well, even still. And so it's required a whole lot of creating of workarounds to get around the things that Apple just didn't provide support for.
Well, and of course, it also launched us headfirst into the idea that the EPUB was not some, alternative format that we didn't really care about because really not very many people used it. The EPUB is really the format for iBooks. And we, had to start figuring out how do we take one manuscript that we already need to write and publish incredibly quickly before it's obsolete. How do we take this one manuscript and now make more file formats out of it in a reasonable amount of time? And we've learned a lot, and we're still learning. I think the system now is pretty good, but it's still a little
changing
crusty.
it, so it's a little hard to say. We're our third completely different incarnation of how we make.
Yeah. And we're having a serious but ridiculous conversation email about how to deal with screenshots if they fall in certain positions within lists because the markdown macro needs to insert 4 spaces before the caption or something like that. And the only way to do that is to make a new and crazy style that...
No, old style's fine.
So,
I mean, the level of detail you get into this stuff is amazing.
That's the kind of level of detail where what we would, in some ways, what we would like to do is just think about the best way to explain to people how to use Apple's technology and other companies' technology. Just how do you write this stuff? How do you present the information? And we love to talk about that and think about that, but we also spend a ridiculous amount of time thinking about, okay, how do we write something in kind of a WYSIWYG environment that looks decent, that we like working in, where we can collaborate and make comments and stuff. How do we write it in that nice environment and then, like in a snap of a finger, make an EPUB, which, by the way, you can't do, but we get ever closer.
Now, you know what? I want you to think back just on the last 45 to 60 seconds. And I want the listeners and viewers...
Short-term memory, wait.
Well, and I want the listeners and viewers to do it too. Think about what you just said, and that's, to me, what makes the Take Control difference. You are so obsessed with getting things just right. And way too many of us would just say, 4 spaces, who's going to care? It's, the content's there and they'll just keep on going. But, and that's been your approach from the start. You really work hard to make these proper. And I guess it's from what you were saying, your background with the publishing industry that makes you want to do it right.
I think that's really true. And I mean, I worked with Peach Pit a lot after, when I started out, I was working with Hayden, which is an imprint of Macmillan, waving hands at various publishing mergers. Who knows kind of where it all is now. I think it's all Pearson, as a matter of fact. And Peach Pit's Pearson too. But at Peach Pit at the time, they were really known for their desktop publishing books. And the people they had writing them were serious professionals, and were the people who were often laying out their own books. They were often designing bits of them. People like Robin Williams and David Blattner, and so as a result, that ethos of it looking perfect, it looking really great, because it kind of had to if you were going to publish to a publishing audience. You can't tell people about desktop publishing in a sloppily laid out book. And so, that really came home in terms of how you have to really do it right. There's a woman, she still works there, a wonderful person named Lisa Brazil, who's a production coordinator, in fact. And I swear she can spot an extra space space, just an extra space in a proportional font, so it's not very thick. Between 2 words, she'll circle things. Goes, is there an extra space there? And I'm like, yeah, there is. How did you see that? And so it was just that level of you have to get it right. Because that's what makes a professional book, and we are professionals. We are not doing this as a hobby. We're not doing this, as we can whack some stuff up on a blog, and gee, if it's got most things spelled right, that's pretty good. We're doing this stuff for real, and we make errors. We're not perfect, but we try really, really hard to get everything right, and to get the layouts looking as good as possible and working as well as possible, and the whole system, the entire thing along the way. We don't like having stupid bits where you feel like you're kind of doing make work.
It's like if the book isn't perfect, there's a hole in the universe, and it's our job to fill the hole. I don't know. It's just, we get very passionate about it.
There's something wrong on the internet. We must go fix it.
Yes. Yep, that's right. Patching problems on the internet. And that goes from everything from, there's a double space there and there shouldn't be. That's, of course, easy to fix with search and replace. But it goes from, nobody's explained this very well. How could any normal person be expected to figure this out? It's completely ridiculous. We need a book to help people because it's a great thing that you can do, but who's going to figure it out? The instructions that companies provided are ridiculous. So it's a whole on kind of that microscopic scale, but also on a more macroscopic scale, really wanting to uniquely contribute to what's out there.
Now, talking about uniquely contribute, again, we go back in time to 10 years ago when software often shipped with manuals, like real manuals that were actually on paper.
10 years ago, not so much. 15, 20 years ago, real manuals written by real technical writers.
Yeah, right, like think about David Pogue with his Missing Manual series, which the whole joke on that was either there is no manual or the manual is so bad nobody's going to call it a manual.
Back in the day, the very first when I got my first Mac, the first two pieces of software I bought were CE Software's Quick Keys and 5th Generation Systems Suitcase, which is a font management utility. Really needed font management back in those days. And the manual that came with Suitcase was brilliant. It wasn't just a documentation about how to use Suitcase. It explained fonts, the whole thing, all of them. It was great. And even back then, Apple had great manuals. Apple had a crack team of documentation people, and they did wonderful manuals. And so, it was really... there was always the joke. If you were a Mac user, you didn't need to read the manual because the program was so easy to use. And you can get away with that on simple stuff. But what we found in this, and the good manuals did this, like the Suitcase manual, because what good does it do to tell you how to use Suitcase if you don't know the difference between... I was going to say something that wasn't true back then. You don't know what the difference between TrueType and a bitmap font is. There wasn't TrueType back then. But the point is that there's so much to know about how fonts worked that explained what Suitcase did. And so that's really where we've come to it as well, is that we're not trying to document how a program works. We're trying to tell you how the tasks surrounding this topic need to take place and how you can perform them. So, the reason why we started, our very first title, Take Control of Upgrading to Panther. No one told you how to do this. Sure, you could put the floppy disks or the CDs or whatever in your drive and follow the on-screen prompts. But that was a big, scary thing, and no one told you, do these 5 things beforehand. Back up your disk, run, fix your permissions, do all this kind of stuff before you even get to those disks. And what happens afterwards? Apple's not going to tell you if something might go wrong, but we could. So, we were trying to be the person who's going to not just sort of walk you through the mechanical steps, but walk you through the before and after as well.
Well, and that was a really big hole in the universe, which we filled pretty well. But I think that other people really agreed with us about that one because there is a whole lot more information now about upgrading. I think other people saw how successful that book was and thought they would have their own spin on that particular topic, since obviously people really do want to feel confident when they're upgrading. So
how did you? You just talked about take control of upgrading the Panther. Panther.
Wow, that was our first book.
Panther, tiger, leopard, snow leopard, lion, mountain lion, mavericks. 7 of those books we've published.
And thanks, Joe. Thanks to Joe Kissel.
And they've all, they're still, I think, an important thing because just at our user group meeting the other night, a couple people said, "Yeah, well, I assumed it would work," and then they're having a few little issues, and it's like, well, did you do this? Did you do that? No, you should have read Joe's book. But how did you go about figuring out what other type of topics to attack? You obviously kind of had your finger on the pulse of the Macintosh universe at the time through tidbits. How did that translate over into Take Control and what you would eventually decide to publish?
I think it really came down, one of the things that, it took us a while to do this, keep in mind. We tried various things that didn't work. So we wrote actually some kind of good books about Take Control of What's New in Word 2004, Take Control of What's New in Entourage. They were good books that didn't do very well, because it turns out they didn't quite scratch that itch. And what we really settled on are these kind of task books. So take control of what is now, take control of backing up your Mac, take control of speeding up your Mac, take control of, I'm sort of going through all of Joe's books, take control of maintaining your Mac. But we also, we looked at things where you're trying to accomplish something, and we could explain the whole thing without it just being about one piece of software.
Right. And so those books, that was, I think Adam's picked up
Airport's another good one.
Right, kind of a third, one third of the types of books we've ended up doing. And I want to come back to that, but I also want to circle back to what I think Chuck's question was, which was how do we decide what to write about at first? Which is basically we called up a bunch of friends and said, we're writing about Panther. Like, imagine we're writing a big book about Panther and you get to write one chapter. What chapter do you want to write? And so that was the original conception, was then we would end up with a really huge book, but customers could just buy the chapters that they were most interested in, and everything would kind of work together if customers wanted to buy a bunch of chapters. But so, yeah, a whole bunch of our books now have ended up being these sort of process books, like Adam said, that put together a whole bunch of different products to help you get through something like setting up your wireless network or your paperless office or organizing your photos or something like that. Another chunk, the second of the three pillars, I would say at this point is our sponsored books. And those are books where we identify a product that we think is pretty cool, but we don't really think we're going to sell enough copies on our own that it really makes sense to write it. And we get the company to help us out because, like Scrivener, for example, word processor from literature, and Latte, great company name. They sell that book really well because they tell all their customers, people who buy Scrivener, about it, which we can't do directly. So that has worked out very well for us. And we typically try to take a pretty friendly to the developer point of view, but we're also looking to help people through problem points in the software. So we might write something that is not necessarily quite as kind as what the developer would sort of have to write for their own manual. So that makes for kind of a nice mix.
I think in those kinds of cases also, we're trying to describe the software, but it's more that we feel like our job is to help users. So that's a real difference, because if you're describing software, you're documenting functionality. You
right,
know,
but if it's got
choosing this thing does this thing. We're saying if you as a user want to do this thing, here's how you do it.
Right,
and so it's a different focus.
If there's a feature that we just think is like, who would want to do this? If the developer can't really explain who would want to do it, or we don't think anyone we know would want to do it, we might not write very much about it. Or if there's a feature that we think is really cool, but to use it really well, like maybe you need to know a little bit about Dropbox or about how your fonts work or something, we can bring in kind of outside expertise. And so that's kind of thing too that we write about. And then I would say another piece of where our inspiration comes from is some individual just really wants a book. So like Joe Kissel will sometimes get to do a book because he just thinks of the idea and he really wants to write the book, like his Take Control of Online Privacy that we did last summer. And sometimes we do a book because, I mean, ultimately, besides filling a hole in the universe with the Take Control series, what we're doing is filling the holes in my brain. So I need to edit and have the Take Control series because otherwise I won't be able to use my Macintosh. So if I can't figure out how to do something, then I need a book. So we finally got a Dropbox book, which was really great. Of course, I could use Dropbox, but now I know how to use it really much better than ever before. We desperately need Joe Kissel's iCloud book. He's working very hard on the second edition right now because nobody can figure out all the ins and outs of some of the things like iCloud Keychain and photo streams. And so we desperately need Joe to write this, not only for everybody else, but for me. How am I supposed to use my Mac? And so that's definitely a piece of it. We're contemplating a File Vault book because I know that I really ought to put File Vault on my laptop, but I really want someone like Joe to walk me through it. So there's definitely a piece of, the point of the series is to help me use my Mac.
It's all about
and everybody
you,
else
It's all about Tonya.
It's all about Tonya, yeah.
Well, it is all about me.
Yeah.
Except, I mean, obviously it's not, but but there is that piece of it.
Tonya just shares the internet with the rest of us, right?
That's right.
The authors, you've talked about Joe, and of course Joe did the first book, and he's still doing books, and he's, first of all, he's amazingly prolific. Second, he's amazingly thorough. Third, he has this way of kind of cutting through all the chaff to get to the wheat that I really love. But not just Joe. all the authors that you all have associated with, I mean, they've all done a great job, whether they've authored one book or multiple books. Again, it's all about that consistency and all. And I'm curious as to how much editing gets done.
It's all about Tonya.
It's all about Tonya. How do you keep that standard of consistency that you let the authors show through with their personality and their approach, but it still has that take control stamp on it?
It's a series. That's the important thing.
Yeah.
I think it would be safe to say that I am kind of a hard ass. And if I can't figure out how to do it with a book, then it's not good enough. And if I'm worried that someone is going to email me because the book didn't work, and I do worry, it's not good enough. And I push, I pull, I really try to get the most that I can before the deadline. And I might be a little bit difficult to work with, but I try to be really nice about it. But yeah, if I don't want to hear from people later that the book didn't work. And I'm probably a bit of a perfectionist about that. And whenever there's something that's not perfect in the book, I'm not happy about it. And because I do spend my entire days, most of what I do is read Take Control books or read other stuff about how to use the Mac on the web, which means I'm not very deep, but I'm incredibly broad. So I'll be reading something like, Joe said something about this like 9 months ago in some other book. What was that? And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, no, I often will have sort of little bits of information that I can sort of bring to the fore to help things be complete. That's my opinion. Adam might have a different one.
But Tonya, I have to say that because I've interviewed a lot of your authors, I make a point of trying to get all the Take Control authors on the show simply because I have so much respect for them and for the approach that you all use. With all the authors, though, that I've interviewed non-Take Control, I've never heard them talk about their editors the way that they talk about you. They have a lot of respect. They recognize you as a tough taskmaster, but they also recognize just what that brings to the table. And I think that's just really unusual. I think it's a tribute to you. It's a tribute to them. It's a tribute to the end product. But it's just a whole different dynamic than you see a lot of other authors. They don't even mention their editors 99% of the times.
One of the things that we've heard from our authors on numerous occasions, many different authors, and many different times, is that writing a Take Control book is the best book writing experience they've ever had. And I think that's in large part because we are authors. We've done this. We know what it's like.
Well, also, I was going to say,
yeah.
I might be a hard ass about some things, but about other things, like we have the Take Control style guide. All publications have a style guide. It tells you very particular things about how you write pretty much everything. So, like, what's a good example? We would talk about whether this
you choose from a menu and you select the radio button.
Yeah, you choose from a menu. You always choose from a menu. If you get really sick of writing the word choose, like 1 in 20 times, maybe you can use some other word. You choose from a menu. So we have a lot of those where, as you can tell, we have an opinion about them. But we also have a bunch of them that are really just suggestions. And we'd like authors to write that way, but if they don't want to, if they have a strong personal belief, they're a little bit wrong, but it's okay. And they can do it the other way. And we do have heard that with some publishers, it's just too damn bad. You absolutely have to write to their style guide in every regard. So we try to give writers some room there, and sometimes, frankly, we're wrong. Our style guide idea is not the best idea. If I hear from, the likes of Dan Frakes, Sharon Zardetto, and Joe Kissel that it should be some other way, then I'm sure they're right.
And we change it. But I think that realistically, it's not about the little stuff. That's not what causes people to be perturbed by working with a publisher. It's that I think it's all too easy. The publishing world's a funny one, because although there's a fair amount of money kind of floating around, the people who actually work in publishing companies are often not paid very well. And so it's actually pretty easy to end up in a situation where your editor is 2 years out of college and has never really done this before.
And has always used Windows. So don't know anything about choosing.
They just got transferred in from another department. Right, precisely. And so you can end up in a situation where your editor is screwing things up. Or where there's politics in the publishing company between your editor and the marketing department, or this gets handed on down from high, where you've got to do X, and just because the marketing person went to a conference and was told that there should be a Facebook like button on every page of your ebook. That's the kind of thing where it just feels like nonsense, and so. Obviously, when we're doing this, first of all, everyone who have ever edited a book is a long-standing professional. If it's not Tonya, it's someone else who's done a whole lot of this stuff. We never throw people at a new editor. We don't have any new editors because if nothing else, that's the most important place to have the experience. But also, I think. There's only us. There isn't this question of who the marketing department wanted. There's a new VP of marketing, or the production coordinator just changed, or all of those things that drive authors to drink actually.
Yeah, someone redid the Excel spreadsheet and discovered that your book should be 80 pages shorter.
Right. Sorry. You'll have to deal with that by tomorrow. And these aren't actually fake examples. I once got a book back in blue lines. I will not out the publisher or the book, but I once got a book back which I had handed in Word and they had done layout on. And I swear they must have freaking retyped the whole thing, because they introduced 300 errors. That I found on the first pass. The second pass, after I corrected the 300 errors, I found another 150 or so errors. I was like, what are you people doing? These were not in the files I gave you. It was just astonishing. And so it's, you go through and they said, hi, we've got blue lines for you. Can you have them back to us in a couple of days? And I said, no, it's Macworld. I'm away all week. It just, you gotta give me some warning on this sort of stuff. I turned this stuff in a month ago. And so, so thing after thing like that, you go through that, you want to kill yourself. It just makes your life utterly miserable. And so, we can have a high pressure, high stakes, short deadline process. But I think our authors know that whenever that's happening, we're putting in just as much time. That it's not a matter of us kind of setting some arbitrary deadline. It's the all hands to the pumps or something. I'm looking for an analogy there. There's got to be an analogy. And so, we pushed out Take Control of Upgrading Mavericks day and date. When we expected Apple to give us some notice like they have every other time. And, for 2 weeks, I put in 60-hour weeks. Just working nonstop. And I shouldn't say that. That's 60 hours of actually on the computer reported by rescue time. I don't want to even think about how much other time I was working when we were talking about stuff or, doing other meeting kind of things that didn't get recorded. So, yeah, everyone knows that it can be hard, but that doesn't mean it has to be, a problem. We've certainly hit situations where we're not as happy with them as we might be, but by the end, we get a book out. It's a good book.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Transporter, your data in your own private cloud. Safe, secure, and cost-effective. Visit filetransporter.com/MV to get yours. I don't know about you, but one of my objectives for life in the 21st century is to have everything I want, everywhere I want, all the time. Yeah, I know that sounds a bit self-centered, but to get everything done that I need to get done, to get everything done I want to get done, and still have some time left over to enjoy life, the closer I get to that objective, the better. That's one reason I love the cloud. For email, for music, for video, for business, for entertainment. It can all be there. The problem is that if I have it all there, I'm paying a whole lot to have it there, or I'm trying to decide what should be and shouldn't be there. That's where Transporter comes in. With up to 2 terabytes of storage on the original Transporter, or up to 4 terabytes of storage using the new Transporter Sync, I can put more and more stuff in the cloud. Or I could get 2 transporters and put even more in the cloud. Or 3. You see where I'm going with this. Best of all, my stuff isn't on someone else's cloud or someone else's servers. It's all mine all the time, syncing and sharing with only those people and devices I want it to. Does that sound a bit controlling? You bet, because that's how I like it. And all of those terabytes of data? That would cost me a small fortune if I were using any other option, but not with Transporter Sync. Buy an inexpensive 4 terabyte drive, plug in a new Transporter Sync, and you've got more storage than most people will need at your command. Command, control. I think there's a theme developing here. Right now, for a limited time, you get 10% off a new Transporter Sync by using the code MV10 at filetransporter.com/MV. That's 10% off with the code MV10. You want a private cloud. You need a private cloud. Transporter gives you a private cloud. Go get it. Transporter, your data in your own private cloud. Safe, secure, and cost-effective. Thanks to Transporter for sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. So another thing I want to make sure we touch on, because I've watched this change and I've had conversations with both of you over the years about parts of this, but the method of creation of these books has changed a lot. Sometimes in a very controlled fashion and sometimes in a hectic fashion, shall we say? Adam, shall we say?
It's usually fairly controlled.
I seem to remember a couple rants.
Right, sorry.
Yeah, but
that wasn't we didn't actually change anything that time. We had to go backwards. That was when Apple screwed up Pages from 4.2 to 4.3.
Yeah, that was the time I'm thinking about. Yeah.
So Chuck, we started in Microsoft Word. And this was really cool because we wanted to solve another publisher problem, which was we wanted authors to be writing in a WYSIWYG environment so they could see and shape their content to exactly what the book would be like. There would be no surprises with tips being inserted in margins and just looking crazy because the margin isn't really wide enough for the tip or something like that. And in a former life, I worked at Microsoft doing tech support for Word 5 and 6. So particularly 10 years ago, I really was in control of Word, and I made, if I may say, a pretty kick-ass template. And our authors commenced to write in Microsoft Word. However, we wanted to make PDFs that weren't just printed to the screen, if you will, which is easy to do in Microsoft Word then and now. We wanted them to have live links that you could click to move around in the document, and we wanted them to have bookmark panels so you could easily see the entire table of contents while you were reading, and click chapter names or headings within the chapters to, move around in the content. You cannot do that in Macintosh Word. So we cleverly moved our files over to Word for Windows, where, with the help of an Acrobat plugin, we could make a PDF that had those link features and bookmark features. And there was just one little problem, which was that this PDF didn't look so good. The fonts didn't really, they were kind of bitmappy, blurry. So we devised a technique, which won't make sense to most readers, but just briefly, we would replace all the pages in the Windows-generated PDF with the pages from a Mac-generated PDF, and everything would line up, and there you go. And we did that for years, many years, until we realized we really had to make EPUBs, and we really couldn't get them out of Word.
The Word approach was annoying in its own way. I mean, we didn't like having to use
I've
Windows.
alluded, there's a word, whatever the word is.
Elided, yeah.
I've elided over all kinds of problems with Word, but keep in mind that from the standpoint of Word tech support, I was, we had, we were able to take care of ourselves, more or less.
So the trick with Pages, and the reason why we switched to Pages at some point, was Apple had actually done a pretty good job of adding in change tracking and commenting, which made it a usable word processor from a collaboration standpoint. And then in one of their small updates, they added, I don't remember quite when this was, 2010, 2011, somewhere in there, they added EPUB export. And that was a big deal. Because before then, to get an EPUB, we actually had to give our Word document to O'Reilly. We work as a distribution partner, and they would send it to India, where people would. And I don't even want to know. I'm just going to don't want to know how they converted it. But they would convert it to XML and then get EPUB and MobiPocket files out of it. MobiPocket for the Kindle, and so we'd get the stuff back. And the fact that it happened at all was great, but honestly, it was pretty ugly. And it didn't look anything like our style. It didn't look anything like our books, but it happened, so we were happy. But all of a sudden, Pages could export EPUB. And it looked like our PDFs to the extent that it could.
Kind of looked like him.
Yeah, we could get the colors and, the fonts and things like that. Actually, one was correct.
Right. It took us about, our sort of Pages 1.0 effort, if you will. I don't mean Pages version 1.0, but our effort 1.0. It was just a whole lot better than it was. That's the best thing we could say about it. And we had to do a bit of fancy footwork, if you will, to figure out how to get a PDF out of Pages the way we wanted it.
Pages doesn't do a very good PDF.
That was quite a chain. And then sort of in effort 2.0 with Pages, we figured out a tricky technique for getting into the EPUB files and inserting our own style sheets. So then the EPUBs actually started to look pretty good. But then Pages broke. So
Pages broke, and it wasn't actually that Pages broke. Sure, we could go back from 4.3 to 4.2 and keep working.
Yeah, we probably, with sufficient motivation, we could have made Pages work. But we were already on to the next thing because we just weren't. The whole Pages system just felt like a collection of.
So the thing, the real problem was that. And we could have kept using that version of Pages, but we didn't basically trust Apple. They had not shown, in essence, respect for businesses that rely on their tools by changing the stuff with no notice whatsoever. And it was a subtle change. It took us a while to figure it out. And I reported it as a bug. I was actually just in Apple's bug reporter recently. They never even commented on the bug. Wasn't marked as a duplicate, wasn't closed, nothing. Turns out in Pages 5, they actually have essentially fixed it. They addressed it. But nonetheless, Pages 09, Pages 4, was out for a long time with no updates. And so, as a business, you've got to be able to say, we're working with tools that we can trust. And so that was sort of problem number one. Problem number two was, even though we could make the EPUBs, and we thanks to Serenity Caldwell at Macworld, figured out how to make the MobiPocket files from the EPUBs. Truly awful technique, but it does work. It was too much work. I mean, it was fussy, it was annoying, and under the hood, the EPUBs were kind of offensive to those of us who grow up, doing HTML right. So, semantic HTML, not visual HTML. I mean, visual, it's all visual under the hood in Pages EPUBs. Then we ran across this service called LeanPub. And they are utterly brilliant because what they do is they take a markdown file, something that we understand implicitly because what we use for tidbits, and they put out a PDF, an EPUB, and a Mobi of that file just by pushing a button. And it's really, really cool. But so the question was, okay, well, how do we make a markdown file? Well, that was when we realized we can make a markdown file in any word processor because it's just text. It doesn't matter. And so our first book, we actually did that. We actually kind of wrote markdown. And because we could do it in anything, we said, well, let's do it in Nisus.
I would like to interrupt for a moment to say that we wrote the book in Markdown, meaning that Joe Kissel wrote it and Adam Engst edited it. And it was really wonderful that they could do that, but it didn't seem like an ideal authoring and editing environment for even all of our Take Control crew. Markdown involves, putting little codes in to indicate how stuff should be formatted. It's not quite WYSIWYG, is it?
The problem with Markdown is not so much the codes and whatnot. It's just that the editing is hard. You've got every space matters. We mentioned 4 spaces before a screenshot bit in Markdown. That mattered. It has semantic meaning. And so it's very brittle because of that. And so what we realized fairly quickly, though, was, oh my goodness, we could use Nicest Writer Pro, which actually puts out a really pretty good PDF.
Yeah, now it puts out a good PDF. They weren't with us 10 years ago that way.
Oh yeah, they weren't there 10 years ago. I mean, this is Nicest Writer Pro 2.0, specifically 2.0.4, and quite recently. This is all 2013 changes. And then Joe was able to, with some help from the developer of Nicest, write a macro that converts the fully stylized, graphical, WYSIWYG, beautifully looking Nicest document into straight Markdown that we can then feed to LeanPub. Now, we did this because LeanPub's PDFs, they don't look as good as we want. And again, we're professionals. We care what our stuff looks like. And so, we decided that, we just weren't willing to take their PDFs. But here's the thing that's beautiful about these two big tools here, both Nicest Writer Pro and LeanPub. They have developers who talk to you, who are interested in hearing how you're using their program, what problems you're having, what you'd like to see it do. And so Nicest had all sorts of various little quirks and things that weren't working right. And there's this feedback menu in the help, feedback item in the help menu, and you fill it in and you send the mail, and you get mail back from Martin, who's asking more questions and making sure or saying, yeah, I can reproduce that bug. I'll have it fixed in the next alpha. It was like the old days, when companies actually talk to their users. Same thing with LeanPub. I said, look, guys, love what you're doing with EPUB and the Mobi, but I can't really format stuff well enough. And they said, well, how about if you put a custom.css file in? And so your styles override ours. Great, that's perfect. And what about the PDFs? Well, how about if we let you upload a PDF and your PDF will override ours? Great, no problem. So, just thing after thing after thing where we'd make a suggestion and they'd implement it like that. It was just such a refreshing change from dealing with Apple, where they'd not only not touched pages in years and years. When they did touch it, they broke stuff. And when they broke stuff, they didn't respond to the bug report telling them they broke stuff badly. So, to go from that to a situation where these developers listen and actually respond to feedback with new versions was such a relief.
And I just wanted to add 2 things to what Adam said, which is, one, the PDFs that LeanPub makes are not horrible. They just weren't a good match for the particular projects that we're doing. And absolutely, if someone wants to make PDFs, EPUBs, and Mobi Pockets with a truly awesome system, they should completely check out LeanPub. And the other thing is, just to second what Adam said, just like this incredible gratitude that we have to the folks at Nicest Writer. What are they called these days? Nicest Software. Nicest Software and at LeanPub, because they really made it possible for us to do what we wanted to do. And they were gracious and responsive and just utterly excellent.
I think that I have this right. I think you all have a long history with Nicest. Because I think I have a piece. Tonya,
that's why I asked what they're called these days.
Yeah, I think I have a piece of videotape from their booth at Macworld Boston in I don't know when, where
Paragon Software,
where Tonya had signed something on a whiteboard talking about how great their product was. So
the thing is that Nicest, I started using Nicest in probably 92, 91, 92, somewhere around there. We actually made tidbits in Nicest for a long time. And this was what later became Nicest Writer Classic, because of course this is pre-Mac OS 10 by a long, long time. But Nicest, first it was Nicest, then it was Nicest Writer, was just wonderfully powerful software. And the two things that really set it apart were that it had regular expression search and replace. So this is kind of a big deal for those people who've used Unix or BBEdit or whatnot, where you can say, find me, the pattern of 3 digits, a dash, 3 more digits, a dash, and 4 digits. That finds the phone number. And there's all sorts of ways you can do this. So where Nicest goes beyond even that, and beyond anything else, is it honors styles too. So you can say, find me 3 digits that are red, and it will do it. And it will not find 3 digits that are not red. So that's stunning. Second thing is that it has a macro language. So anything you can find or do in the program, you can just write out steps to have the program do that automatically. And so Nicest Writer, fabulous program. Joe Kissel, he worked for them long ago. He wrote a book called The Nicest Way, all about, and it was a great book, but never sold very many copies, unfortunately, because Nicest isn't used by that many people. But it was a true classic of its time and everything. We all loved it, but they didn't make the transition to Mac OS 10 well. So for the longest time, you could just keep using Nicest Writer in classic mode. And it was sort of okay, but then classic mode went away, and they came out with something called Nicest Writer Express, which didn't really have the full. It had some of the grep stuff, but it didn't really have the macro language, and just wasn't a powerful enough word processor. Then finally, they came out with Nicest Writer Pro, which was sort of getting there, and then finally Nicest Writer Pro 2.0, where all of a sudden it had those features back. And more so. I mean, the macro language had been completely replaced and was far more capable, still a little funky. I mean, macro languages are often funky, but it's very capable. And so that was really, it was sort of like, this never happens, like getting an old friend back from 15 years ago and they're suddenly, exactly like it was before. That just doesn't happen very often.
So I have to ask, and I know one or both of you are going to know, how many Take Control books are there out there?
Individual titles or copies sold?
Well, individual titles. Yeah.
Oh, individual titles. We've published 127.
Wow. And
that includes additions and sort of title changes like the 7 Take Control Upgrading 2 books. It does not include minor updates. We don't have actually a good way of counting that.
2 or 3 times. I'd say 2 or 3 times the number of books we've published.
It's actually not as many as that. I tried to count in a couple of ways, and actually came up with in the low hundreds. And we like to do free upgrades. So if we do a book that we call a 1.0, the first edition, we will often do a 1.0.1 to fix a typo or something, or we'll do a 1.1 to add some information that when stuff changes, or 1.2. Those are all free. And initially we did more of them. But frankly, as we got better at it, we didn't need to do them as much, because we were writing books that didn't age out badly, because we knew what kind of stuff to avoid, and we weren't making the kind of mistakes that made us do typo fixes very much. And so we have some books like Take Control of iCloud where we've done 4 free updates just to keep it live over 2 years, I guess. And so now we're finally going to wrap, and do a completely new edition. But most of our books, or many of our books, really will go from a 1.0 to a 2.0 without having any minor updates, because they don't need them.
That's one of the things that distinguished, I think, Take Control along the way, too, is that it wasn't a matter of churning this out and then, in 6, 8, 10, 12 months, I have a new title. You would do that upgrade thing, and you would do it on some and you would not do it on others, but there was always sort of a good logical breaking point when you would not do the free update, but would do a full new version. And I love that, because that seemed to take the best of this whole idea of electronic publishing and the accessibility of the authors, and put it into practice, where some other publishers have since started or tried to do that, but it just doesn't come across the same way, and I think it has fallen flat for them.
Well, it's an interesting thing because in a traditional book publishing model, before we had all these ebooks and stuff, books would have printings. And a new printing of a book might just be because they only printed, 40,000 copies and now they need more. But usually a printing would be an opportunity to correct a few typos if the author was aware of them, or maybe even insert just a little bit of new material.
Couldn't change the page count.
Yes. However, when you bought a book at a bookstore, if there was another printing, the publisher would not contact you and offer to give you a free copy of the new book. But the idea that small bits of particularly egregious errata could be corrected later if a book was popular enough to have multiple printings is a fact of life. So with the versions, we certainly had that background for it could just be a way to correct a few small things, but of course we don't have to worry about page breaks in the same way. And we just had a whole lot of things changing because we're trying to write about this very fast-paced environment where the stuff we're writing about can change overnight. And for example, Josh Senners is working on a book about Apple TV, which we're actually publishing week by week on the Tidbits website. Before we wrap it into a book, we published a whole chapter about what kinds of content you can access through Apple TV apps on Monday. And then what was it, on Tuesday, Apple rolls out how we can now access PBS. So that's the kind of thing we're all the time dealing with. And what's interesting is we developed a very long time ago this somewhat just really thinking way outside the box system that allows people to pull down a free new version from their existing book. The book is sort of the ticket that they need to get the next free version. And that's been kind of a unique thing that we've been able to offer to our customers. But in the sort of, being a bit ahead of the curve, we noticed sometime a while back, Apple added this feature for their multi-touch books. And quite recently, they added that feature for just the normal EPUBs that they sell out of the iBook store. Where just like app updates, you can now download ebook updates, and it's all that same model. I don't know if publishers, for the most part, will kind of stick with that printing kind of idea, or if some of them will start to get a lot more innovative about what goes into a free update. So it should be interesting to watch.
Guys, you've been very generous with your time. There are two other things I want to make sure I ask. I want to go back beyond the beginning. Why take control?
Can you do that?
Why take control? Where did the title? Where did the idea come from? When did the light bulb come on and say that's
well, dummies was taken, idiots was taken, stupid people. No,
oh, good.
We spent an evening brainstorming about it. I mean, it was a really good conversation. I don't recall, the exact moments of the light bulb idea, but I do remember we sat down for a couple hours and really talked through what we were doing and what we wanted, to achieve with the particular first batch of books. Do you remember more, Adam?
Well, I think in fact, it was somewhat predicated on responding to the proliferation of, the For Dummies and For Idiots books.
Well, we didn't want to write books for stupid people. We're not, right. I mean, honestly, that niche is well taken. And one thing that always frustrated me in life, because it is all about me, is I'm joking, but it is frustrating when you are not actually particularly stupid and most of the learning materials that you can encounter feel like they're written for fourth graders, and you would like something that could address you a little bit more at the level that you're at, which is, I have graduated from high school, in fact, college, and I do know how to use a computer, more or less. I just happen to get stuck sometimes. And so we did want books that most people, when they write a dummies book or for idiots book or whatever, they say in the introduction, well, I don't think you're an idiot, which is really, really kind. But we really wanted to come from a very different place than thinking of our readers as stupid.
And yeah, what Tonya said is correct. What the usual explanation or apology for those titles is that the software makes you feel like a dummy or makes you feel like an
right.
That's but regardless, we wanted to keep it positive, and we really had this kind of view of the user almost as like, and there was some imagery we looked at that we never quite came up with, was like the captain of a ship. That you were in charge of your computer, and keep in mind, this was also at a time, this is pretty early in macOS 10, and one of the big things that was actually troubling people about macOS 10, and which has only gotten worse, frankly, is that in macOS 9 and earlier, you knew what you were doing. You were in charge. In macOS 10, Apple started setting a lot more things like you will have a documents and movies and music and blah, blah, blah folders. Too bad. You can't not have them. And you have to use them. You have to put your applications in an applications folder. You can't put them in any other folder you want and have them work properly. And so people were actually feeling as though Apple had taken control away from them.
Well, and also there was Unix now, which was a bit boggling, plus multiple user accounts. And I remember feeling like I had 3 or 4 desktops. I'm not exactly sure what I meant by that, but at the time I was quite passionate about how that was a problem, and I had many of them. You felt like the rug had been pulled out from under you.
And so the goal was really to put people back in control. I mean, that was really, there was even a little bit of that, I don't know if you remember the posters from the heady days of power computing, when take back the Mac. There's a little bit of that kind of feel to it. And so the other thing that we did, and we actually maintain this all the way through, is that in most books, you will see the headings done in gerunds. Learning how to print. Understanding the difference between A and B, that kind of stuff. Whereas one of the things that we decided very early on was that the series voice was of your expert friend who was just going to tell you how to do it. And so we don't use gerunds in our headings. Our headings are imperatives. So they are things like back up your disk before proceeding, repair permissions. And we're telling you to do this because we're not telling you all the extra stuff. We're telling you the stuff you need to do. You need to know this, and you should just do it. This is not a suggestion or a possibility. Go do this. You need to make a backup, and you need to do it now. And so that really kind of, there's a little bit, I realize it's a little bit strident, but I think it's important too, because too many books that we had seen, some that we had written even, got bogged down in background. Let me tell you about the history of backups. It's a long tale, but we'll start at the beginning and just settle in for 50 or 60 pages while I tell you stuff that you can't use.
Yeah. Or let me tell you about what every single checkbox in this enormous dialog box means, even though half of them are completely obvious. A quarter of them, nobody knows what they mean, but I'm going to make something up that kind of sounds like how they're written anyway. And a quarter of them are actually useful. But let's just, talk about it for a long time. We're much more like, okay, the 3 interesting checkboxes are this, 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 and here's what you should do unless you're this particular case, and in that case, do this other thing. We're much more focused on getting you in and getting you out.
And Adam, you said the voice of the series, and that's exactly it. Take control. I love just that idea, because just saying it, you feel empowered. That sounds kind of hokey, but it's true. It really does. It's not like I'm being talked down to. And Tonya made a great point. I even if I don't know anything, I still feel like you're giving me credit for knowing something. That makes me feel good. And
we want you to feel good.
Well, and Adam too. And I've said this a lot. The idea that I look at a take control book as I'm hiring an expert for X number of dollars to walk me through and teach me how to do these things, because I know they've been tested. I know the people. I have the benefit of knowing a lot of these folks personally. So I know how much time they put in, and I know that they're not going to steer me wrong. And that's a lot different than somebody going through those 25 check boxes, Tonya, and explaining what they do. They don't tell me whether I should do it or not. They just tell me what they do. And I may not understand half of them. So.
And they might not understand half of them either.
So
sometimes we work with the checkboxes that nobody can figure out.
Yeah.
on a few occasions, sometimes with the sponsored books, in fact, where we tend to have a closer relationship with
But then we can figure out all the check boxes. It's fabulous.
Well, we can figure out all the check boxes, but there are times, and this is something which is really great when you can make it happen, where the author is sitting there trying to explain how to freaking use this particular bit of interface, and he can't do it well. And that's an indication that it's a bad interface. If you can't explain an interface, it's a bad interface. And it's wonderful to sometimes, we don't obviously prefer to get into a situation where we have to beta test the app too. But, we like to be able to say, it's really hard to explain this to people, so you might want to take another stab at it. And, and the good developers, usually understand that, hey, there's something there. These people have explained a lot of software, and if they can't explain yours, you got problems.
Good point. So last question, and again, we've been at this for a while, but 10 years of Take Control, where do we go from here? Are we just going to continue? Do you have any major plans, or is it one of those things that evolves naturally?
You might get a different answer if you ask the both of us. You might get a different answer depending on the hour of the day from either one of us.
Okay.
There is one thing that's, the simple fact of the matter is, and, when you read all these new agey business motivational things about follow your passion and do this and do that and whatever, the simple fact of the matter is we build a business. We depend on this business. A number of our authors depend on this business. So we are not going to be changing anything hugely radically, because that would be suicide. We don't have another business. We don't, we can't suddenly go out and earn a living doing something else, without major trouble. And we have, 50, 100,000 customers, some very large number of customers who have bought at least one book from us. And we have some people who've bought, we have people who have bought, 100 books from us, non-trivial numbers. Like, I think I ran the numbers, and there have been 9,800 people who've bought more than 10 of our books. Wow. That's a lot of loyalty. And so, we do feel a responsibility to those people. So thing one, whatever we're going to do in the future, well, at least in the short-term future, it's not going to be a lot different, because that's what we do. We do it well. We rely on it. Our customers rely on it. So it's a big, happy, coincidence of goodness. That said, we've been doing this for 10 years. We get a little bored sometimes too. And so, we've tried doing some other things in the past, and we'll probably try doing them in the future. We did Take Control Live, working with your iPad with Joe, and
last year,
yeah. And that was interesting. We had a good time doing it. It wasn't a flop by any stretch of the imagination, but it was also a lot harder than we expected, and it didn't meet some of our ideal goals, such as, for instance, when you're doing live video, after the fact, it's not that attractive to buy. Sold well while it was happening, and then dropped off. Okay, that's something that's good to know. Maybe we won't replicate that next time. We've started doing these streaming books, where we say to Tidbits members, people who are supporting Tidbits directly, hey, if you want to, read Jeff Carlson's Take Control of Your Digital Photos on a Mac, we'll publish a chapter a week, and that will allow us to sort of get some feedback, make sure we're in the right direction, all of that. And it gives the author a nice schedule and deadline to meet as well, so they don't kind of dither around. And that's been kind of fun.
That allows us to publish content that we could not publish as a book. So as of right now, we're doing Apple TV. I certainly hope Apple TV settles down a bit in the next 8 weeks, because we are going to publish a book, assuming we don't literally just have to go back and rewrite it again. But it's nice to be able to provide content within kind of the form factor of what feels like a book, about a very, very quickly changing tech topic. I'm sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, honestly, and then one thing that we're thinking about doing, actually, LeanPub, one of the neat things they do is they make it very easy to publish versions. And so we might try publishing a book in versions that way. So it's a little different than the streaming book and tidbits approach. We're always looking for ways of making things easier. One of the things we've heard a couple of times recently is people actually like getting chunks of books at a time because it's somehow easier to say, oh, I've got to read this long article, rather than I'm faced with this whole book, I'll just read one chapter. And so it feels like it fits into the way people kind of snack on information on the internet now. And so, we're going to play with all that kind of stuff. We might play more with video or screencasts, as a way of doing that, kind of getting more of that kind of I won't say interactive, but multimedia content into the books. And hopefully we'll be able to stick with our current publishing process for quite a while, because that's something that drives us nuts. When we have to change infrastructure, it just takes it sucks all the energy out.
Yeah, I think another.
And we'll have a new website. Really, we will.
Before we hit year 20, we're so going to have that new website. We've been working on that for a long time. I think one other thing that will be happening increasingly in the coming years is, honestly, we're pretty good at what we do, and we're a pretty good team. We sometimes bring new people, and I think we might have a new author coming this year, which would be really cool, actually. But as far as books that just kind of walk you through the operating system in kind of an obvious way, like something like, Take Control of iOS 7 as a possible book, we probably won't do those books as often, because it feels like there are other people making ebooks that kind of cover that territory pretty well. And we feel like we want to dig into some deeper niches and find ways to cover things that nobody else is much covering. And so that's a little challenging for us to think about that, like, we don't have a general iOS 7 book right now. We're not planning to make one. Because honestly, we're kind of bored with writing about, you tap the settings app and you go in there and you tap general and you tap this and you tap that and something's turned on that wasn't on before. And it's not that different from iOS 6 or iOS 5, but it's enough different. Has to be rewritten. We're kind of bored with that. We're really good at it. Other people can do that. So we're looking more at what you can do with particular apps, or how you can sort of integrate things into processes, or how you think about technology. So we're trying to
passwords.
Yeah, we're trying to. We're growing up. We've been doing this for 10 years now. So we don't want to write about things the same way we did 10 years ago, because we're 10 years better at it. And so we've been actually doing a lot of soul searching about what that would mean in terms of what topics we cover or how we would cover them. And we're hoping that our core readers might also be starting to get a little tired of this kind of general stuff we've been covering, because they've been reading it too. So they might be ready for topics that dive deeper or are kind of more thoughtful also. And we'll see how that goes. But one thing's for sure is we don't want to be bored or be boring. So we will continue to address that.
One of the things that may not be obvious from the outside, but there are topics which are a big deal at one point in time and then just go away as an issue. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, Kirk McElhern did Take Control of Users and Accounts in Panther, and all the way, he did a couple versions
Tiger
of it.
And a couple others. And then nobody wanted to buy the book anymore. It was like either everyone who ever wanted to buy the book already had it, or nobody cared about user accounts anymore.
Same thing with Glenn Fleischman did a book on file sharing. No one does file sharing anymore. Joe Kissel did Take Control of Running Windows on a Mac. We did 5 editions of that book. And now, just go get Parallels or Fusion. It doesn't really matter. It ceased to be interesting, and the questions have stopped. So, it was fascinating to, when Apple first released Boot Camp, and that was kind of, and the other virtualization software came out, and it was really kind of hard to get it working, and it was this twisty maze of little passages, and you had to deal with Windows and figure out how to get files back and forth. That was great. We could add some value there. When it's just a matter of, say, go buy Parallels and install Windows, we can't add any value, and we're bored with it. And it turns out readers are too, because, I said, we stopped publishing that book. I'm not sure we've gotten, hardly more than a handful of people asking about it in the last 3 or 4 years.
Oh, that reminded me of just one more thing I wanted to say. which is that we will probably continue to publish books in the technology sphere. But we have published one book that is not particularly technical.
And we love this book.
And I love the book too.
Honest to God, it's possibly one of the best books we've written, except we did write it like 7 years ago. So it's possible, that we're even better now. But this book is very timely. It's Take Control of Thanksgiving Dinner by Joe Kissel. And Adam will give Chuck in the show notes a coupon discount for anyone who might be listening to this and be thinking that they really want help with Thanksgiving dinner. And I sincerely hope that by the time 20 years rolls around, that we may have actually sold 500 copies of this book. That would make us really happy if in the next 10 years we could just get the sales count up to 500, because it's just a great document, and we had so much fun making it.
We had we don't really have the audience for this book, which is
that's why we've hardly sold any copies. Nobody wants to read how to cook from us.
But that said, we were just we're going for Thanksgiving. We're going to visit Tonya's family, but some grad student friends of mine invited us to Thanksgiving as well. Not realizing we were away, and they're very cute. They're in their mid-20s. This is the first Thanksgiving they've done. They're inviting a bunch of their other grad student friends who can't go home, things like that. And I sent them, I was like, oh, so sorry we can't come. Love if we could, but here's a copy of this book. And the mail I got back was, oh, that's so useful, thank you. Because that's kind of who it was written for. Someone who is faced with this just daunting prospect of putting on a dinner party with 5 or 6 dishes, including this turkey thing that you've probably never cooked before, for 15 people. It's crazy that you assume that you could just kind of wing this. And
ouch.
Drumstick.
Yeah. Rim shot.
I was just going for a drumstick joke, but any event. So that's the audience. And we just said that we never figured out how to market or anything like that, but it really is a great book, and it was so wonderful to see some people who were the perfect target audience getting some use out of it.
It is. In fact, Joe's been on here to talk about that book, and we've done a couple sort of Mac Foodie episodes with Joe that have been just plain fun. But it is a great book. It's I don't know, maybe everybody that reads Take Control books goes out for Thanksgiving. I have no idea.
I think they all know how to make Thanksgiving dinner, because let's face it, we're only writing to people who've been around the block a few times.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. At least that's what we'll assume for right now. So we have to find the uneducated to pawn this book off on. Well, guys, thank you so much for the time. Congratulations on 10 years.
Thanks for having us.
I can't believe it. It's amazing. It's been a lot of fun. I know we did some deep dives here on a few things, and I think it's important that folks understand what goes into this. To use the cooking metaphor, it's kind of important to know, just how much time and trouble it takes to prepare a great meal. And it takes a lot of time and trouble to prepare great books. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. As Tonya promised, we'll have something in the show notes about a discount on Joe's Take Control of Thanksgiving. I can't encourage you enough to go to takecontrolbooks.com, check out all the titles, even the ones that are a little older maybe. Download some of the sample chapters and go for it. There just is not a better value out there, and there's certainly nobody that's creating this quality of book out there. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.